Good morning, everybody. My name is Bricky. I hope your Tuesday has been going quite well. I assume that it has not been going quite well for the members of Behavior, as they have most likely been berated consistently with the new changes to the Doctor and Hex Ruin that were posted yesterday, January 6th on Monday. Now, obviously, talking bad on devs is not a good thing, so don't do that, because that ain't cool. But I will want to go ahead and make a little video discussing the changes to the Doctor, as he is one of my favorite characters, and I have been known to be a huge Doctor fanatic in my time, and a lot of people have asked me about the Doctor changes. So that, and considering that Hex Ruin is a extremely popular perk, and their changes to the perk have not been met with very good positivity, I wanted to discuss that as well, and hopefully discuss it in a much more fair manner. Obviously, as a mainly killer player, I will be biased, because that is just, well, what it is. Though, as I've been playing a lot more Survivor lately, I'm trying to kind of keep a neutral standpoint, though I do want to say that just in case. So, I want to start with the Doctor, because the Doctor is by far the lower end of the important discussions today. Funny enough, Ruin is actually going to take up the bulk of today's conversation. So from what I've gathered from the Doctor changes, they were looking to make the Doctor more based on his afflictions and hallucinations, and a little bit less of the fire and forget tracking simulator that he currently is. The Doctor is definitely difficult to be stealthy against or just get away from, because the moment he swaps forms, he sees where everybody is, and any idea of stealth is thrown out the window. Granted, stealth is already not a thing used in this game very often, but the Doctor makes it literally a thing that is never ever used. So for this, they are replacing both of his swapping abilities and making it so that instead he has a new ability called Static Blast. Static Blast makes it so that you get a shock attack everywhere in your terror radius, 32 meters of one gigantic zap. This zap makes it actually so that he slows down a pretty significant margin and ends up having a very large charge time with a cooldown, a long cooldown. The point of this is to get everyone around him to scream, reveal locations, but only be able to use it every so often, instead of being able to just kind of fire and forget. Also, this also makes it so that when he is no longer swapping forms, because he has no forms, they give him a cooldown when he uses his regular shock therapy attack to make it a little bit more fair. So let's talk about Static Field, swapping over to Static Blast real fast. Static Field was problematic, I'll give you that. It was very low skill, and it was generally annoying to deal with, because all you had to do was go swap forms and walk around the map, and you'd know where somebody was, because madness would shoot up. This time, you have to be a little bit more, I don't know, I guess the word would be statistical, because he is a Doctor, about using your Static Blast ability. You have to go ahead and think to yourself, I bet there's someone in my terror radius right now. And then the thought process of the survivor could be, well, I'm in his terror radius, I could try to get out of it, but that might risk me running away. And if I run away, will I leave scratch marks? Will he know where I am after that? Etc. So you generally have to have a little bit of a risk involved going with the Static Blast ability. And I like that. People who feel that it is bad that he is slowing down while doing it, I don't think is really a problem, because this isn't made for stopping loops. This is made for detection and increasing madness in its own right. And it also gives them a little bit more map pressure, because as you can see people a little bit more, it allows you to walk around at max speed and be able to use this ability every so often, instead of walking around at a slower speed, just slowly charging up the ability. And very rarely did I ever get somebody to Madness Tier 2 using regular Static Field to begin with. The thing that I am the most worried about is the shock therapy difference. This is, without a doubt, the one thing that I can't speak about unless I see it in the actual PTB, because I will read you this paragraph real fast right here. As shock therapy and static blast are now linked to separate inputs, we've removed the different treatment and punishment stances to improve the gameplay flow. The Doctor's base movement speed is still 4.6 meters per second, the regular movement speed for most killers, but he can now use shock therapy more easily, as he doesn't have to switch stances to gain access to it. So we've added a brief pause after using shock therapy before he can attack or use another ability. Shock therapy is your standard shock attack that the Doctor is currently using right now. What I think people are worried about is that after zapping somebody with shock therapy, they think they won't be able to attack for a long time, making his ability to stop loops completely worthless. I don't think that is their intention here. The point, at least from what I'm reading, is that normally when you're trying to stop loops as the doctor, you shock them and then you're forced to swap stances over to get your hit off. I think what they want to do is allow it so that when you shock somebody, you can't immediately just smack them because there's no more stance changing anymore. Now it's just shock and then a little delay and then a hit. If this delay is roughly the same delay as swapping stances currently, then there's absolutely no problem. That's all totally fine. If it's longer, that's going to be a problem because the whole point of being skillful with the doctor is zapping somebody before they hit a vault point or a pallet and then swapping over and getting your hit off. If it takes too long, that tool is useless. If it's too short, it's overpowered. So long as they keep a rough, maybe 1 second swap time or a 1 second delay like they currently do, I think it should be perfectly fine and there shouldn't be any issues. Lastly, they have the snap out of it thing, dropping from madness level 3 to 2. I guess if you're missing a skill check, it'll only cost progression. It won't entirely reset. And if they stop the interaction before it's complete, they will not lose their progress. I'm not quite sure if I like the not lose their progress part, but for the just 25% progress drop, that's fine. I don't really mind that. Honestly, this is the kind of thing that you have to see in game to really judge because it looks scary on paper, but in reality, if it's as I stated here, where all it does is add a delay to swap with the swapping effects or to simulate the swapping effects and just having a big static field instead of walking around and mindlessly revealing people, then so long as the add-ons are better, I'm okay with that. Honestly, the add-ons are the biggest part. Personally, I'd like it if some of them got worked into his kit. For instance, the red stain appearing sometimes, the light heartbeat, or even the fake pallets. That would be very helpful and really assist the doctor in his gameplay and really sell that mind control style play as well. So we'll have to see when this comes out. But until then, let's talk about Hex Ruin, because that is a much different topic. So for the Hex Ruin changes, the first paragraph says the upcoming mid-chapter update will also include a major overhaul to Hex Ruin and an associated update to the Gatekeeper Emblem. Recent data shows that Hex Ruin is used in about or over 80% of all games in the red ranks, and across the entire user base it appears in about 45% of all games. We took a closer look at the perk to identify what makes it frustrating to play against, 3 key issues, punishment for players, reasons why it's annoying, because it is a little bit annoying if you're playing a survivor. But anyway, it says we also look carefully to see how it functions as part of the killer's loadout. Beyond the obvious desire to slow down generator repair, Hex Ruin functions as one of the few key perks effective at slowing generator repair in the first couple of minutes of the trial. This is important to killer's rankings because the Gatekeeper Emblem highly rewards keeping as many of the 7 generators incomplete for as long as they can. Because Hex Ruin is one of the few tools a killer has for getting an iridescent Gatekeeper Emblem, the update needed to respect that. Just a straight up nerf without considering the consequences for that emblem wouldn't be a good plan. So before getting into the Hex Ruin change, let's go over the Gatekeeper Emblem. I'm not going to go over that because honestly, if you care a whole lot about emblems, I think that's not a very good idea because the emblems generally don't matter a ton into this game. Some of them, I guess, if you really want to rank up, but ranking up in this game doesn't really mean anything, and it never has, besides making it take longer to get games. So I'm going to skip all the emblem stuff because I honestly think factoring anything emblem-wise into the game balance is already a mistake as it comes. But going past that, they say the new Hex Ruin is simple. All generators are affected by Ruin. If a generator is not being worked on, it regresses at 1, 1.5, or 2, depending on the level, times the normal regression rate. The hex effect persists as long as the related hex totem is standing. This version of the perk has many benefits. Survivors who are working on generators are unaffected as the perk no longer affects skill checks. Killers must be active in pushing survivors off generators to get value from it. It is less useful in the early game, but very useful in the late game. Survivors now have a more interesting choice about when it is necessary to find and cleanse the hex totem. Now, that being said, boy, this feels like an incredibly gross oversight to the exact reason why Hex Totem is such an important perk with so many killers and why it is run so often. I myself have tried my best to remove Hex Ruin, there it is, that's how it goes, from my builds in an attempt to make it so that I can try to play a little bit on harder difficulties, because without Ruin into your build, it removes that RNG part of it and allows you to try to play and really work on your more mechanical side of things because you're going to need them. because without Ruin, things get done significantly too fast. First things first, Hex Ruin is annoying to fight. That I completely understand. As a person who's playing more Survivor now and seeing Hex Ruin all the time, I can say it is absolutely annoying to deal with. Every time you see it, you kind of just sigh, and you either get off your generator to go look for it, or you just try to tough it out either by hitting normal skill checks taking forever, or by trying to hit great skill checks and running the risk of screwing up and blowing up a gem. Now, a lot of times I end up just getting the great skill checks because I'm getting better at it, and Hex Ruin basically means nothing to me. The only difference is the 2% increase that I would be getting from hitting those skill checks. Overall, sure, it's annoying, but as anyone who has ever played Killer, and especially anyone who has been leveling up a new Killer, you notice this extremely quickly. By the time you find a person, by the time you get one hook, 2 gens, 40% of the survivor's objectives have been complete. Contrast that with the ability of hooking one survivor, which is not even close to 40% of your objective, and the difference is substantial. In the beginning of the game, the Killer has 0 map pressure. Absolutely none. Survivors spawn away from him or her, and they always are near generators that can work on immediately, generally with multiple people. This is why you see discordance becoming so much more popular, because you need to get those double people on gens off ASAP, because 2 people working on a gem, even with the difference in speed, doesn't really matter. It is so significantly more important to have, which is also why Hex Ruin was so useful, because 2 people working on a gen generally made that gen regress much faster when 2 people working on it, because that's double the amount of skill checks, which means double the amount of regression. So normally they would have to spread out, pick at least 1 gem, or go look for the totem. Hex Ruin in its own right is made 100% entirely for the early game, and that's what it's supposed to be. Hex perks in general are early to mid game perks. No Hex perk, with the exception of Noem, is a late game perk. If you run Ruin, you're trying to slow the game down in the early game. If you run Devour Hope, you're trying to get to at least 3 stacks, and then hopefully get a little bit more after that if they can't find it in time. The third seal, blindness in the early game. Haunted ground, have them break it, try to get some insta downs in the early game, and then of course Thrill of the Hunt is mainly just for protecting your totems. Almost every Hex perk is early to mid game, with the exception of Noed. Hex Ruin especially is that major perk that differentiates immediate every generator done with the ability to at least get to somebody. I've always said, and for a while now, that survivors need some kind of either gen speed like slowdown, progression slowing in the beginning of the game, because the Killer has literally no pressure in the beginning. Some kind of like the first minute of the game, they repair at 40% efficiency, and then when it's over, right? That's why Corrupt Intervention is becoming more popular, because it slaps those gens way in the back of the map where the survivors are spawning, allowing you to get there a little bit faster and get that pressure on. Ruin does not work in the late game, and it never will, because Hex Totems don't work in the late game because they are found and destroyed every time. Hex Ruin is one of the fastest killed totems ever. We used to have a little joke on my stream where every time a Hex Totem would be killed, someone would donate like $1 and say, this game's Hex Totem was lasted 1 minute and 2 seconds. My favorite one was this game's Hex Totem lasted about, I think it was 9 seconds, 10 seconds. Basically, they spawned next to it and it was gone, right? It never goes past maybe 1.5 minutes. And so expecting it to be useful in the late game just isn't reliable. And especially when you're going to chase survivors off of a generator, what happens at a high rank? Well, it's quite simple. You run into a generator with 3 survivors on it. Maybe you hit one, that survivor runs away, and then if you chase them, the other 2 survivors run right back to the generator. Or if you try to roll around and try to get them off the generator, then you're wasting time. Somebody else is doing a generator, and that person you injured is currently healing or working on the other generator as well. So it just consistently forces you to play this little back and forth game, even worse in the early game, because of how damn strong people working together on generators are, especially without Ruin. This would even make that worse, because then every second they're not touching the generator means that more regression is happening, which means that there's really even a bigger point to run back and forth to the gen so that survivors can get it done. It's extremely, it's a pain in the ass, if I'm being honest. It's a pain in the ass. Hex Ruin is entirely for that first 30 seconds to a minute of security. That's the only reason anyone ever takes it. And if that's removed and you try to make it a late game, it won't be touched because late game totems don't work, because late game totems aren't alive. They are always killed, and they are killed very quickly. Instead, all that's going to happen is that the Hex Rune will be removed from the build, and it'll be replaced with most likely Corrupt Intervention, or perhaps maybe Thrilling Tremors. And that neither of those, maybe Corrupt a little bit, helps enough in the early game to really make a decent use, to really make it worth taking. There's a reason why Ruin is number one, because that early game needs it. Because if you don't, you lose 2 gens, 40% of the objective before you even get a single hook. And also, the last point I wanted to make on this is the killer balance disparity. Killers are already a bit far away from each other when it comes to balance, but as time went on, whenever I reviewed a killer, I would say, hey, the best part of a killer is how good they are in the chase, right? How fast can they end loops? That was the truth about a year and a half ago. That's actually slowly adjusted to, instead of best in the chase being the most important thing, it's now the second most important thing over map pressure. Now, map pressure is the number one thing because of how insanely fast gens are completed. And with gens completed so insanely fast, Ruin becomes that much more of a staple. So now, high map pressure characters, the Nurse, the Spirit, and the Hillbilly, will reign even more supreme. These will be seen even more than all the other killers because they have the most map pressure, because the other killers can't run Ruin. Imagine playing the Pig or the Clown right now. Good luck, man. Especially the Clown. Just good luck. Sure, you can end chases fast, but at this point, it doesn't matter anymore. God, imagine actually getting the Clown on Grim Pantry. I don't know what you're gonna try to do. That's just impossible to deal with. So with this change, what you're gonna be seeing is just people are gonna drop Ruin. No one's gonna use it. Everyone instead is going to use Corrupt or Thrilling, and that'll be the next new core perk. And the best killers will become even stronger, and the killers without pressure will become weaker. Now, if you ask for my opinion what they should do to Ruin, if anything, and this is literally anything, I would make it so that it regresses, all gens regress at only half speed instead of full speed, so like half a kick speed, and not make it a hex perk. Just make that a standard perk. They regress at half speed if you're not touching it, maybe even a quarter speed, and don't make it a hex perk. Because honestly, I have no idea what other way to deal with this. Or you know what, implement a 60-second early of the game generator slowdown, or maybe make them take longer, because at this point, I'm kind of giving up. Gens are done so fast at high ranks. Oh, and Survive with Friends is going to become even better, because they have to make sure that people are still on gen. So if somebody gets off a gen, they need that coordination to put somebody new on that gen, so it doesn't become regressed. So Survive with Friends, even stronger now. So yes, I think the Ruin change is quite poor and a huge miscalculation. I would highly advise changing it and at least trying some other way to work with it. The Doctor, I'm more hopeful than I am worried, so we'll see how that turns out. And yeah, I wanted to give my 2 cents on this. I think it's a gross miscalculation, and hopefully they will reconsider or they will change it in some way, because I do not think this is a very good idea. All right, that's it for me. Thanks for watching, everyone. I'll see you later. Bye-bye.